Hello, and welcome to ELA Plus, your free supplemental guide to the English language arts. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. In today's video lesson, we're going to teach you how to read informational literature. Now, I'm not assuming that you don't know how to read just because you're here on YouTube watching videos rather than reading a book. I assume you know how to read. This video is not going to teach you how to read then, but it is going to teach you how to read intelligently. Learning how to intelligently read informational literature begins with understanding exactly what informational literature is in the first place, so that's where we'll begin this video lesson. We'll follow that up with a brief discussion of the types of informational literature you're likely to encounter during your English language arts studies. Next, we'll discuss the cardinal rule for reading informational literature. Then, we'll talk about the necessity of annotation. After that, I'm going to teach you how to tell if you fully comprehend a work of informational literature, and then we'll wrap things up with some comprehension questions. Okay then, let's get to it. So, what is informational literature? Put simply, informational literature is any nonfiction text that shares information in a literary fashion. Now, I want to place special emphasis on in a literary fashion. Informational literature must be literary. After all, there are many texts that merely share information. Product instruction manuals, financial statements, traffic signs, and so forth. I mean, the copy on the side of a package of Metamucil definitely shares information, but it's not text of a literary variety. Whereas if you want a literary, indeed philosophical exploration of the necessity of the regulation of scatological assignations, then you need look no further than Michel de Montaigne's magisterial essay Of Experience, where that immortal essayist shares his thoughts on pooping with exquisite literary charm. Now, informational literature shares with imaginative literature this literary quality. But where the two differ is this. In imaginative literature, what the author is sharing with the reader is an immersive, fictional experience. Whereas in informational literature, what the author is sharing is information. So when we talk about informational literature, what we're talking about is nonfiction. There are many different types of informational literature out there, but you're only likely to encounter the basics during your English language arts study. Basics such as science, philosophy, history, biography, autobiography, memoir, essays, and political science. Just to give some examples, a science book you might read would be Darwin's On the Origin of Species or Stefan Alexander's The Jazz of Physics. In philosophy, you're almost certain to encounter the works of Plato, or more recently, the works of Martha Nussbaum. As far as history, hopefully, you're going to be reading Herodotus. I mean, after all, historians form like Voltron, and Herodotus happens to be the head, know what I'm saying? But more recent work would include stuff like David Blight on the American Civil War, or if you want to go back to the classics, Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which in my opinion is the finest English language prose ever written, so definitely check that one out. There's plenty of biography, autobiography, and memoirs out there, ranging from Plutarch to Thomas Chatterton Williams. With essays, you could find something like Joan Didion or the aforementioned Michel de Montaigne. And finally, with political science, you're definitely going to be reading the American founders, at least I sincerely hope that you are, but perhaps also some more contemporary work like Thomas Piketty or Richard Epstein. Anyway, you get the idea. Now that we've defined informational literature, we need to talk about the cardinal rule for reading informational literature. And that cardinal rule is this. You must understand a book before you criticize it. And I really can't stress this point enough. In order to criticize a book, you must understand it first. If you do not understand the arguments of a book, you have no business criticizing it or even really talking about it. Further, and this is particularly important for students, if you don't have an adequate understanding of a book, then you're not going to be able to write nor speak about it adequately, and your teachers or professors are going to give you an appropriate grade based on that lack of understanding. So again, I stress the cardinal rule for reading informational literature is, you must understand a book before you criticize it. This rule naturally raises two questions. The first question is, how does one come to an understanding of a book? The second question is, how does a reader know when she does truly understand a book? We're going to answer these two questions right now. As it pertains to coming to an understanding of a book, there's a maxim that you need to keep in mind. And that maxim is this. A book is not read unless it's written in. So that means you're going to have to get a print book. This is non-negotiable. Get a print book. And then take your pencil. and scribble all in the margins. Fill up those pages. I want these books to look like, the side of a 1980s era New York City subway car. There are many good reasons for this. First, by annotating the book, you are actively engaging with the book. You are forcing yourself to think about what the book is saying. This deliberate act enhances your critical thinking skills because you're not simply just blindly running your eyes over the words. An active reader is a better reader. Further, multiple studies have shown that multisensory learning leads to better memorization and long-term recall of learning material. That is why properly annotating books will help you master a book's content. Think about it. If you just read a book, the memory of it is likely to slip away after time because, memory fades. An intelligent reader, though, wants to install this book's content in his long-term memory. Annotation helps achieve this. With quality annotation, you're practicing multisensory learning. You're reading the book, you're thinking about the book, you're writing about the book and its margins, and then you're reading what you yourself wrote down. This multisensory approach aids in developing durable long-term memories of the book's contents, and hopefully greater clarity and recall of the book. In summation, increased activity with a book through proper annotation not only leads to enhanced critical thinking skills, but also to more durable long-term memory of a book's contents. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how to properly annotate your books. There are 4 key practices to properly annotating your book of informational literature. The first thing you want to do is perform what's called a pre-reading of the book. You'll also want to create landmarks in the margins of your book by summarizing, in your own words, every single paragraph. Also within the paragraphs, you want to mark important passages. And finally, you also want to write summaries of every single chapter or section of a book in your own words. Of all the types of annotation that I'm going to share with you in this video lesson, the so-called pre-reading is probably the only one that you're not already familiar with. In fact, I wasn't even familiar with it until I read How to Read a Book by Adler and Van Doren. And frankly, this practice changed my reading life, so I'm happy to share it with you. Think of this pre-reading annotation as creating a detailed map of the book before you actually start reading it. So, just like how when you go to a city, you don't want to get lost, so you want to kind of memorize the map or at least have a map on hand, the same principle applies to reading informational literature. Create a map. Adler and Van Doren call this inspectional reading, as you can see here from my copy of Francis Fukuyama's On the Origins of Political Order. So I'm going to use my annotations, my pre-reading annotations of this book to help guide you through the process of pre-reading or inspectional reading. And there are 4 parts to this pre-reading annotation. First, you want to find a blank page somewhere, preferably at the beginning of the book, near the title page, and you want to write down the title of the book and also the author's name. Then what you want to do is you want to look at a few key parts of the book. And when I say look, I mean just skim quickly any text that's found there. First, the cover of the book, or the back cover of the book. In the back cover of the book, you're likely to find a pretty good description of what the book's about, and also some blurbs from, sympathetic authors or whatever. The table of contents also provides a good skeleton of the book, helps you get a better understanding. The index too. If it does have an index, definitely take a look at that. You're going to be presented with key terms and whatnot. After that, if it has a preface or an introduction, really quickly skim this. Now, once you do that, once you quickly read all these parts of the books, you're going to have a general, basic understanding of what this book is about. Then you'll be able to complete the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th parts of pre-reading annotation. The second part, after the title and the author name, is called the classification. And in the classification section, what you want to do is briefly state what the book is about. You want to start with the most general definition of the book, and then get more progressively detailed. But always, you want to keep the classification section very short, no more than 1 or 2 words. Looking at my own pre-reading classification of the Origins of Political Order, you can see that this book is a nonfiction book, a history book, a political science book, and a comparative government book. Pro tip, these classifications are all provided on the copyright page of a book, which is typically found on the opposite side of the title page of a book. And here on the copyright page, you're going to find how the Library of Congress classifies the book, and they're pros, so they know what they're talking about. The third part of pre-reading is what Adler and Van Doren call the unity. The unity is essentially the main thesis of a book. What you want to do with the unity is distill everything that you just quickly read into 1 or 2 sentences so you capture what the book is about as a whole. Now with the unity, what you want to do is write it down in your own words. You're going to hear me repeat this a lot during the course of this video lesson. You want to write down the unity in your own words. Do not copy. Think about it first, articulate the language yourself in your head, and then write it down. Okay, so now that you have the unity written down, what you want to write down, again in your own words, is the organization of the book. The organization of the book is a map of the book. The table of contents is going to be a huge help here. But again, I'm stressing this for a reason. Don't just copy down the table of contents. What you want to do here is a kind of anticipatory reading. So you're looking at the table of contents, you're considering all the other stuff that you've read already very quickly about the book, and then you're creating this map, this organization of the book, and you're doing it in your own words, and try to do it in as few words as possible. But essentially what you want to do is write down what you think this book is about on a chapter by chapter or section by section basis. Okay, and guess what? Now that you've finished with the organization of the book, the unity of the book, and the classification of the book, and also written down its author and title name, you're now done with the pre-reading, with the inspectional reading, and now you're ready to get to the real reading. As you're doing your real reading of the book, there's certain types of annotation that you want to be engaged in. The first, and maybe the most important, is the paragraph summary. What you want to do in the paragraph summary is with every single paragraph, you want to summarize the thesis of that paragraph in your own words. So as you can see here in the Origins of Political Order, this first paragraph is about 20th century democratization. Briefly summarizing the pages of a book is going to achieve 2 things for you. First, it's going to move the information of the book from your short-term memory to your long-term memory because you're engaged in active reading and multisensory learning. And 2, and this is particularly important for students, it's going to help you in your writing of the papers because what you're doing with these paragraph summaries is essentially creating landmarks or guideposts throughout the course of a chapter. This way, when you're writing your paper, you don't have to page through blindly looking for an argument that you remember reading. You're going to have it conveniently written in the margins of the book. Marking informational literature is probably the type of annotation that you're already familiar with. Here on these 2 pages of On the Origins of Political Order, you can see the type of markings that I like to use. Let's take a deeper look. First, we have the simple underline. What we want to do with the underline is mark supporting facts of a paragraph's thesis. You can see on this page that I underlined 3 lines. These 3 lines read, approximately 1 in 5 countries that have been part of the third wave either reverted to authoritarianism or saw a significant erosion of democratic institutions. The reasons that I underlined these lines is because they support the paragraph's thesis, which is what I noted in the margin as democratic recession sets in. So again, what you want to do with the underline is bring attention to the supporting facts of a paragraph's thesis. Can you spot the other things that are underlined on these pages? Let me know in the comments what it is and why you think I underlined it. The second type of marking that I use is called the box out. Most people highlight, but I box out. And there are 2 criteria that I employ for content that I box out. Number 1, it's got to be longer than 4 lines. And number 2, it's got to be really, really important information. And so I box it out because I want my attention to be drawn to this really important information. As you can see, I've boxed out 2 passages from On the Origins of Political Order from these pages. And the reason I did is because I want my attention drawn to these passages whenever I pick up the book again or whenever I'm writing a paper and I need quick access to this information. And this is why boxing out is so important. In fact, when you're reading, I want you to be like Embiid in the paint, just boxing out all the important passages and grabbing all that important information. The final type of annotation is the brief summary of the chapter or section. What you want to do here is briefly summarize in your own words every chapter and every section. Aside from the pre-reading, this is the most important annotation that you're going to make because it's an integral part of moving the book's content from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. If you've been properly annotating your book, it's going to be very easy for you to formulate a chapter summary. All you need to do is sit back, think a little bit about what you read, review all the markings that you've already made, think a little bit more, and then articulate in your own words the thesis of the chapter or section. Then all you got to do is write down that articulation. Note also, as you can see here on page 6, that there's another type of annotation that I like to use, and that's called the margin line. With the margin line, I just draw a line down the margin of any important information that's longer than 3 lines. So in other words, it's stuff that I would otherwise underline, but not necessarily box out, because box out is the most important stuff. So it's somewhat important, but it's not that important. And with that, we're done. We've completed our pre-reading, and we've completed all our annotations, so we probably have a fairly good understanding of what this book is about. But there's something we need to ask ourselves to see if we truly do understand the book. That thing we need to ask ourselves is, can we pass the intellectual Turing test? What is the intellectual Turing test? Well, it's based on what computer scientists working in artificial intelligence call the Turing test. The Turing test is the test of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from a human. The test was introduced by English mathematician and computer scientist Alan Turing in his 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. The basic idea behind the Turing test is to find out if a human can determine whether or not the entity that he's chatting with is a computer or not. If the computer can successfully convince a human that that human is talking with another human, then that computer, that artificial intelligence, has passed the Turing test. The intellectual Turing test is similar. What you want to do to pass the intellectual Turing test is be able to convince another human being that you actually believe in the thesis of this book. You want to be able to present its thesis without any bias whatsoever. Total good faith explanation of what the book is about. Now, the reason that this is important is because with nonfiction, the author has a thesis. And more often, we come to nonfiction books with preconceived notions. We're ready to disagree. And when we're ready to disagree, our guard is up. We're not really reading for understanding. We're reading to argue. And remember the maxim of reading informational literature. It's that you must first understand a book before you criticize it. So you want to be able to pass this intellectual Turing test. Reading for understanding is what is going to achieve that. So if you can pass the intellectual Turing test, you now have a comprehensive understanding of that book, and you're ready for the next step of intelligently reading informational literature. The next and final step of intelligently reading informational literature is criticizing informational literature. And this is the best part. I mean, come on, we love criticizing stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you've properly annotated the book, if you've passed the intellectual Turing test, then you're 100% capable of properly critiquing any book that you read. I promise you. So think about it. Did you like the book? Why or why not? What did you agree with? Why or why not? What did you disagree with? Why or why not? This part of criticizing the book is the final part, as I said before, of intelligently engaging with the book. It's the last part of actively reading the book. It's a very important part. Your teachers in school are going to ask you to write papers. That's exactly what criticism is. You're going to critique what you read. And with everything that we just covered, you're now 100% ready to do that. All right then, that brings us to the end of our video lesson on how to intelligently read informational literature. We kick things off today by talking about the different types of informational literature. After that, I told you about the cardinal rule for reading informational literature, and we followed that up with a little bit about the importance of annotation. We wrap things up by talking about the intellectual Turing test and why that is so important. And now we conclude, as we always do, with some comprehension questions. Number 1, what is informational literature? Number 2, what is the cardinal rule for reading informational literature? Number 3, how do you properly annotate a book? Number 4, what is the intellectual Turing test and why is it so important when you're reading informational literature? This concludes our lesson on how to read informational literature. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something from it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Also consider sharing it with friends, fellow students, and your English teacher. If you have any questions about this video or other questions about your English language arts studies in school, please do not hesitate to ask down in the comments. I'm available, and I'll do my very best to offer high-quality answers to anything you might want to know. ELA Plus is a free, regularly updated supplemental guide to the English language arts. Subscribe to learn more. Until our next lesson, keep reading get obsessed, and take care of yourselves and others.